A sex worker from Brooklyn has the chance to live the idealized American dream when she meets and marries the son of a Russian oligarch. Her happiness doesn't last long as his family heads to New York City with designs on annulling the marriage. Chaos ensues. It's Anora. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm leaving the theater. All right, this is Ronald, and I am leaving the theater after seeing Anora. Anora, written and directed by Sean Baker, starring Mikey, Madison, Mark Eydelesteyn, Yura, Borisov, and Karagulia. And as usual, for a complete cast listing, you can go to the link in our show notes. It is just me today. Anora is a film about a sex worker who who meets a son of a Russian oligarch at a strip club. He then propositions her for a kind of relationship, if you will, and it escalates to marriage. And the majority of the movie is about his parents being upset about the marriage and trying to annul it and using his henchmen to kind of annul the marriage. So it is a bit of a struggle between Anora and Vanya, as we call him, that's her husband, and the henchmen who are trying to stop this marriage from happening, or stop this marriage from happened. Starts off, one thing I like about this movie is Mikey Madison's performance, because it starts off with this, with her kind of engaging in the orchestrated dance of interacting with a stripper, which is like, if anybody has ever been to a strip club, most people that work there, most dancers, escorts, have this very particular transactional dance in which they are offering you something, but it's a limited menu unless you pay more, and then you can possibly get more things. But the menu is kind of limited at every level depending on what your wallet looks like. I thought she did a very good job of managing those interactions early in the movie. Just basically being at the strip club, interacting with patrons, all of that. I was like, wow, this is like very, very true to life. I have been to 3 strip clubs in my life. It is not my scene. I do not think I would ever go back. But knowing how these interactions work, they are very much geared towards the promise of a fantasy. And then you get versions of it, but you're not necessarily, it's never what you imagine these interactions are going to be. But they do a very good job of kind of talking about what that negotiation looks like up front. Very much her saying, hey, let's go to the ATM, let's go to the private room, like you can get more in there. And then in this one situation with the son of the Russian oligarch, Ivan, she ends up doing more. It is the movie in the beginning, there is a lot of sex going on. There was so much sex at one, I mean, when you first see it, it's like, wow, that is some sex happening. And then as it kind of continues, you're like, okay, I'm sure this is for a purpose. I'm sure this is going somewhere. And for me, the movie felt pretty aimless, and I felt like I kept waiting for them to kind of, and to be clear, I mean the beginning of the movie. It felt pretty aimless, and I felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the synopsis of the movie, we kind of know where this is going. If you watch the preview, you kind of know, like, oh, they're going to get married, and then something's going to happen. So I felt like I spent a lot of time, like, waiting for, and then something was going to happen. And that, I feel like, that's maybe detrimental. It is a result of the trailer. I don't think that the movie did anything wrong there, but sitting there were several times in which, as I started to be like, all right, can we like get to where we're going? It seemed like the movie sensed that I was ready and would move on. I would say in the beginning, we start with, hey, she's a stripper, she's in a club, we know she's going to meet a dude. And so it felt like I was just waiting for her to meet the dude, but in the middle, they're showing all of these great interactions. Then she meets the dude, and I'm like, okay, great. So when is this going to escalate to marriage? And sure enough, after, a few times, I feel like I was waiting for it to happen. And then, of course, that happens. I think the problem with that is that for the rest of the movie, I kept waiting for the something that was going to, I was waiting for the something that was going to be like, oh, and then this happens, and it turns out he's underage, or it turns out the oligarch is actually the president, or something like that. I was waiting for that, and this movie kind of like, it made me do that for a while, but once I got rid of that in my heart, I felt like I was enjoying the movie for the most part. It's very funny. There's a lot of interactions that should not be funny that were definitely funny. There's bumbling henchmen who are kind of the main part of the movie, the bumbling henchmen. And I feel like no one ever pulls out a gun. There's no gun. I sensed danger, but no one ever pulls out a gun. The lack of weapons gave it this kind of like, it gave this kind of grounded real world sensibility where it's like, obviously we have power, but our power comes from the fact that we have money and access to the levers of power, not violence, even though there is some like light kidnapping or trafficking in this movie, which I don't take lightly, but I'm saying like by definition, that's kind of what was happening a couple of times. And I feel like this movie kind of like, it presents itself as in real life, like what would actually happen. There's an instance in the movie where someone is being tied up and another henchman walks in and is like, yo, what are you doing? Don't do that. Like, why are you tying them up? And then the henchman is like, well, if I don't do this, this person might run. And then it goes back and forth. Like, obviously we don't want to be tying people up, but also they might run. So what are we supposed to do? And so it's kind of like that happens over and over for a lot of the portion of the middle of the movie. This movie felt to me a lot like Triangle of Sadness, and if Triangle of Sadness and Uncut Gems had a baby. Two movies that I really like. Triangle of Sadness is a little more difficult for me because it's another movie that at times feels aimless, but I know is trying to make a point from the beginning to end and the interactions that the characters are having with one another, whereas Uncut Gems 100% has a point, and it's pedal to the metal all the way. And I feel like there's times where this movie is accelerating. There's other times where it's just kind of like, hey, isn't this interaction wild? Like, what's happening between these two people, isn't that wild? As it continued, when we get to like probably the last third, I think that's where my enthusiasm for the movie started to cool a bit. I liked it in the beginning when she's doing the interactions. I thought the performance and that was good. There's a lot of the impetuousness of youth that exists, these people making an impulsive decision, which I thought also was good. Then we get into the middle of the movie where it's the bumbling henchman and like kind of like the plan gone wrong, the curdled plan. But then later on, as we like start getting to, the end where kind of I'm like, okay, so what is the resolution here? What are we actually doing? My enthusiasm really just started to cool a bit because it felt like I was getting frustrated with the lack of agency that Anora has in this film. And it felt like there were several times in which it would not be hard for her to do certain things. At one point, she speaks a certain thing out loud that she's going to do. And I'm like, okay, so obviously you can do that thing. And what's responded is what I heard was an empty threat. I'm like, that is absolutely an empty threat. There's no way in the world they can do what they're saying they can do. But it felt like again, the groundedness in the real world, maybe Anora's response was basically like, ugh, I don't even feel like dealing with this. Let me just do what these people want. And that felt frustrating over and over again because I was just, at this point, I'm like, so I'm just watching a movie where this thing happens and then this thing kind of unhappens in a very slow and painful way. And so, that kind of at that point was like the rating was dropping in my mind. And it also because I think people kind of ruined it a little bit for me because everyone was saying it was so good. Like a lot of people have said this movie is very good. Oh my God, Ronald, it's so good. You got to see it. It's so good. It's so good. And I'm like, it's good. It's a good story. And I like Mikey Madison's performance, but it feels very much like an Oscar movie where it's like an extreme slice of life that's presented like, wow, yeah, you ever think about that? I say all that until it gets to the very end, where it kind of earned a quarter of a star back for me. Something happens at the very end, and it made me, it started reframing my thinking for the whole movie, being like, oh, this is about transactions. This is a movie about transaction. This is a person trying to survive on transactions, over and over again, trying to survive on transactions. And in the biggest transaction of her life, it's her trying to hold on to what she would receive in that transaction. And that, once that all clicked, because of a couple of things that, not a couple of things, but one particular thing that happens towards the end of the movie. And for those who've seen it, there's a something that's happening, and then you think it's about to, something else is about to happen, and then what actually happens makes me realize, oh, okay, so these are transactions. Like, that's what's happening here, and this is a woman who's living her life full of these types of transactions, which I was like, okay, because when I got to this point of the movie, I was like, well, what is this movie trying to say? I don't know what this movie is trying to say, and I just didn't feel like I had it until the very end, which for me, I'm not a big fan of like, oh no, if I don't watch it till the very end, I won't I feel like there's part of messaging that and again, I know twists and things like that happen towards the end of a movie. I get all that, but I'm saying like this was a very important interaction that happened at the end of the movie that kind of like then justifies kind of the rest of what is happening throughout the movie in my thinking. Now that being said, this might be an instance in which everyone else is telling me that this movie is supposed to be really good, and I was just trying to find a reason for it to be good, because other than that, if I watched this movie, like if no one had told me that it was good and I just walked in, I'd probably walk out being like, I mean, it was all right. Like it was, I don't know. And I feel like if anyone's listening to this and saw it and they're like, oh, I got to explain to Ronald why this is good, I feel like, well, then that tells me if you have to tell me why it's good, then is it good on its own? And I think that's what gets me. I watched Triangle of Sadness, walked out and being like, look, I don't know what just happened, but all I know is I'd watch that again. And I watched that movie twice and I was like, man, I still don't know what this movie's trying to say, but I really enjoyed the ride. This is close to that. This is close to me saying, I don't understand what it was trying to say, but I think I enjoyed the ride, and I think I would watch it again, which automatically gives it a 3-star, right? The biggest thing for me is like the jump from 3 to 4, and at one point this movie sat at a 3.75 stars, and the truth is it's a 4-star movie. I enjoyed it. I would watch it again, probably at the house. I don't think I would go to the theater to watch this again. I'd watch it at the house. I would turn the caption on. I would relax. I would, like analyze it in that way. So yeah, I think this is a 4 of 5-star movie, and I definitely, with the critical acclaim and stuff that it's getting, I think it's definitely going to, at least be in the Best Picture race for Oscars. It's definitely going to get a writing nomination, an original screenplay nomination, and I think Mikey Madison should probably get a performance nod. Maybe. I don't think she'll win, but I think she should definitely get the nod. And I'm not enthusiastic about this 4. I think it's a 4. I think it's a solid 4. It's not a 3. It's not a 3.5. It's obviously a 4-star movie. But again, I think this begs the question, like when people tell me stuff is good, this is kind of like the hype bubble, which I've talked about. I don't know if I've ever talked about on Leaving the Theater, but the hype bubble is when like somebody sets your expectations before going into a film, and then you go in with higher or lower expectations because of what they said. Meaning that if someone would have told me that this movie was garbage, I probably would have left being like, this is easily a 4.25, 4.5 movie. But I walked in with 4-star expectations, and I felt like this movie had to justify to me a 4-star rating because everyone said it was so good. But I think this movie is good. I would probably have to watch it again to confirm, but I feel okay giving it a 4-star rating because everyone else said it was good. This is like, honestly, this is probably the hardest part about being a critic or criticizing things generally, is like part of me is like the pressure to say like, did I like it or not? And the truth is, I don't want to feel like, of course I don't want to feel like the stupid in the room that's like, I didn't get it. I did feel like I get it. I feel like if it's about transactions and that's true, then yes, I got it. Otherwise, I feel like maybe I'm just fighting for my life here. Y'all can hear me spiraling right now off this movie. Maybe it's because I just don't want to hear anybody tell me like, yo, it was really good, and I go in and it's like, I mean, it was like, what did I miss? It's still a 4-star movie. I'm fairly certain, like, there's stuff that I would watch again, and I would watch this again with the eye on transactions specifically. and say, what does that mean? And if that's true, then yes, it's still a 4-star movie. So I'll sit with it for now. 4 stars, 4 of 5 stars. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios. I mixed this episode, and if you're enjoying this episode, I want to tell you how this episode came to be. Today is Tuesday. This episode is coming out on Wednesday, tomorrow. So by the time you get this, if you listen to it on Wednesday, know that I saw a movie yesterday, and then at 3 a.m. on Wednesday, I got on a plane and went to Austin. This last week and a half has been kind of tough, kind of hard, but I fight every week to try to get the episode out because I set this deadline for myself to put it out on Mondays. But this week I knew I was going to miss the Monday because it was Veterans Day, so I was like, so I'll put it out on Tuesday, and I missed that deadline too. So now I'm trying to put this out on Wednesday, so I'm going to go home and edit it right now, and it's just me, y'all. If that means anything to you, like, geez, Ronald, that's like really hard or whatever, join the Patreon. Patreon.com/leavingthetheater. Patreon.com/leavingthetheater. Show art from Heather Wilder. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. For more information about Anora, check out our show notes. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or Threads at OHitsBigRon. That's at OHITSBIGRON. You can find out more about this show and other Oh It's Big Ron Studios shows by following us on Instagram at Oh It's Big Ron Studios and on Twitter at Oh It's Big Ron Stu. That's STEW. Leaving the Theater will be back soon. Thanks for listening.